Turkey, a NATO member, is flirting with BRICS membership. BRICS just told the US dollar to take a hike. And NATO's new Secretary General is already threatening Brazil, China, and India with global economic pain. Welcome back to the only show that'll get you up to speed on global tensions before your coffee cools. I am Mandatory Fun Day. This is Worldwide Wednesday. Here's everything you need to know in a couple minutes. Stick around to the end because we're going to break down India's bold move that upset both NATO and BRICS partners. And don't forget, I love you. I will be reading my favorite comments from a previous video in this video at the very end. So if you don't want to stay for the information, at least stay for that. NATO Secretary General, he's been saying some stuff in his first major move. He didn't hold back. In Washington, standing beside U.S. lawmakers, he warned Brazil, China, and India that continuing trade and tech ties with Russia will lead to painful secondary sanctions. He even mentioned dual-use technologies and microchips showing up in Russian drones. That's a not-so-subtle way of saying we're watching your exports and we know what's getting through. This echoes the Cold War strategy of containment, where the U.S. used economic levers to box in the USSR's allies. Back then, countries faced stark choices between siding with Washington or Moscow. But in 2025, the world is multipolar, and BRICS nations are bigger economic players. The NATO Secretary General's warning sounds bold, but the risk is pushing neutral countries into Beijing or Moscow's embrace. It raises a question: is NATO trying to isolate Russia or inadvertently globalizing the resistance to itself? At a recent BRICS summit, the joint declaration wasn't just performative. The language specifically accused NATO of expanding its military-industrial complex under the guise of security, referencing defense budget surges in the US, UK, and Poland. There were also backroom discussions about forming a BRICS defense forum, though nothing official yet. Brazil, usually moderate, went further than expected, hosting multiple closed-door sessions on food security and energy independence from the West. It's not the first time a group of emerging powers has rallied against a dominant alliance. Think of the Bandung Conference in 1955, when dozens of non-aligned nations met in Indonesia to push back against US-Soviet polarization. BRICS now fills a similar anti-bloc role, but with more leverage and nukes. NATO's massive spending surge, especially with a hawkish Trump back in power, gives BRICS a unifying villain. Could BRICS create an actual military counterpart to NATO? We might be watching the first drafts getting written. Trump's move to deliver more Patriot systems to Ukraine comes with a second wave of long-range missiles and expanded U.S. training programs. But it's not just military aid. He tied it to an economic threat. 100% tariffs on any country aiding Russia economically. Brazil, China, and India were mentioned directly. That's a more aggressive stance than during Trump's first term. During his first term, he focused on trade deficits rather than military leverage. This is reminiscent of the 1941 Lend-Lease Act, when the U.S. gave Britain war material in exchange for economic influence. But this time, the U.S. is using weapons to extract loyalty or punishment, depending on your position. These moves may galvanize NATO's core, but they're also pushing the global south into economic and diplomatic rebellion. And ironically, that makes BRICS the cool table in the geopolitical cafeteria. Would forcing neutrality ever really work? And is it even possible for us all to get along? That is not a rhetorical question. I actually want to know if you think it's possible. The video is not over, but I'm going to tell you about the mandatoryfunday.com, where you can pick up all my merch: shirts, hats, water bottles, and a bunch of other stuff. Members of the website get 20% off and access to exclusive content. And in addition to that, we've got a link on there where you can order regulation compliant shirts. Let's get back to the video. So in that summit's aftermath, Brazil announced that half of its oil exports to China would not be traded in yuan. I don't know how to say it. I'm not Chinese. India and Russia expanded their rupee ruble oil mechanism, and South Africa began talks with Russia to establish a joint BRICS credit rating agency as a counter to Moody's and S&P. China is also offering cross-border digital yuan as a payment mechanism for Belt and Road loans. This feels like the 1971 Nixon shock in reverse. Back then, the US severed the dollar from gold and became the world's unchallenged currency hegemon. Now, BRICS is trying to build a system that doesn't rely on it at all. If they succeed even partially, it could fracture the global economy. It's not just about oil or loans. It's about who controls the rules of the game. Do you guys think that BRICS is ever going to become a legitimate challenge to US financial dominance? Honestly, are they going to be able to usurp the US as the global financial power? Now we're talking about the UK, France, and Germany's defense cooperation. This week's announcement included plans for a joint space surveillance network, nuclear submarine R&D sharing, and expanded drone production under the Future Combat Air System, FCAS. These aren't symbolic gestures, they're strategic redundancies in case US support falters or splinters. It could be potentially tied to the current presidential administration in the US's America First policy. And I'm not going to say whether that policy is good or bad. As always, I'm going to remain neutral. But other countries are going to look at us, the US, and they're going to say, hey, maybe we need to adjust based on what's happening. That's just geopolitics. This feels a lot like Charles de Gaulle's 1960s decision to pull France out of NATO's military command, forcing Europe to grow up fast. History is repeating. European NATO powers are preparing for a future where Washington isn't the babysitter anymore, but it also gives BRICS a potential wedge. Could Russia or China court European defense firms or offer tech partnerships? Yeah, it's a stretch, but in geopolitics, unlikely doesn't mean impossible. Turkey's BRICS flirtation came with President Erdogan's characteristic ambiguity. He is the president of Turkey. FM Fidan praised BRICS as a stabilizing alternative and proposed joint energy corridors. Russia welcomed the move and China saw it as proof NATO was vulnerable. But India firmly said no, citing Turkey's support for Pakistan and inconsistent positions on terrorism. Even Iran reportedly backed Turkey's membership, but India held the line. This is 21st century non-alignment on steroids. Turkey is trying to play both teams, like Yugoslavia did during the Cold War. Except now the stakes are higher. Turkey holds the keys to the Black Sea via the Montreux Convention and can stall NATO logistics to Ukraine. By cozying up to BRICS, it adds new uncertainty to every NATO move. But India blocking Turkey, that's proof BRICS isn't one big happy family either. It's an uneasy anti-NATO coalition with a lot of knives under the table. Spain's refusal to meet the 5% GDP defense target echoes a trend among southern NATO members, prioritizing domestic welfare over military growth. They cited inflation, rising energy costs, and sovereign fiscal priorities. President Trump's rebuke was swift, calling Spain a weak link and suggesting economic retaliation via trade restrictions. Germany, meanwhile, tried to mediate, calling Spain's 2.1% a valid interim target. This echoes the 1980s when Greece and Italy clashed with NATO over US missile deployments. The alliance has always struggled with unity between the hawks and the reluctant partners. BRICS sees this and loves it. It reinforces their claim that NATO is driven by a few aggressive states while the rest get dragged along unwillingly. Spain's position could encourage other NATO members to question the cost of alignment, especially if BRICS offers economic benefits in return. During the recent SCO summit, India blocked a final communique after Pakistan was praised for its counter-terror efforts. India's delegation walked out of the security working group, stating that Pakistan continues to harbor anti-India militants. China and Russia urged compromise, but India refused, even threatening to downgrade its SCO participation if future communiques ignore cross-border terror. This is BRICS' Achilles heel, internal contradictions. India's historic conflicts with Pakistan date back to partition and 3 full-scale wars. Trying to put them in the same diplomatic tent as equals, it's like asking Greece and Turkey to co-lead a beach volleyball team. India's bold stance shows that while BRICS has economic goals, its political unity is fragile. For NATO, this could be an opening, reinforce ties with India, and fracture the enemy bloc from within. This week's events aren't just standalone news items, they're part of an emerging feedback loop that's accelerating the breakdown of the old global order. Each decision from a NATO or BRICS country feeds into a wider cycle of provocation, retaliation, and realignment. Let's start with NATO's push for increased defense spending. The US and Northern Europe are going full throttle with 5% GDP targets and weapon shipments to Ukraine. But Spain's refusal shows us there's no unified will inside NATO. That gives BRICS room to operate diplomatically and economically. If Spain and others start resisting NATO pressure, BRICS can present itself as a neutral trade partner. Not out of moral superiority, but out of opportunity. Then there's the economic warfare angle. President Trump's 100% tariff threat is not just aimed at Russia, it's aimed at countries like India and Brazil who thought they could ride the middle. But here's the kicker. Pushing those nations too hard might drive them to accelerate BRICS integration, and if that happens, it reinforces NATO's worst fears. Further justification for defense spending and economic containment. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Take Turkey's BRICS flirtation. On its own, it's provocative, but manageable. And that's how we want it. We want it provocative, but manageable. But in combination with Spain's dissent, India's SCO defiance, and NATO's escalating threats, it reveals a larger trend. Middle powers are hedging. They don't want to be trapped between Western expectations and Eastern opportunities, and as they bounce between these camps, they make alliances shakier, less predictable, and far more volatile. Now throw de-dollarization into the mix. If BRICS makes progress toward a functioning alternative currency system, even if it's just partial, it will directly impact NATO's ability to enforce sanctions. That reduces the power of economic tools like tariffs and makes kinetic or cyber responses more attractive. We're not there yet, but every step BRIC takes towards a non-dollar system makes NATO's current playbook less effective. And finally, India. India's defiance at the SCO, its rejection of Turkey's BRICS bid, and its cautious NATO cooperation all show it's not anyone's puppet. But that makes it the most strategic swing player in the game. If India leans west, it breaks BRICS momentum. If it leans east, NATO loses the Indo-Pacific. If it stays in the middle, it forces both blocs to compete harder, raising tensions in everything from chip production to maritime strategy. In short, The world is in a grand realignment, and each move adds pressure on the next. Defense spending drives economic warfare drives de-dollarization undermines sanctions, and sanctions inflame regional conflict zones. Every action this week has second and third order effects, and the feedback loop is only tightening. The next few months could decide whether we drift into a new Cold War or if someone slams the brakes. We just covered an entire geopolitical earthquake. BRICS is plotting de-dollarization, NATO's tightening its inner circle, and middle powers like Turkey and India are playing both sides like pros. So what do you think? Will NATO's hardline economic threats backfire? Can BRICS really unify with all these contradictions? Or is the world heading toward a new kind of Cold War with trade wars, digital currencies, and drone diplomacy? Let me know in the comments, hit like, hit subscribe, and check out one of my other videos if you want more deep dives on geopolitics and just generally to see me being loud in a room by myself. I'm gonna read off some of my favorite comments from one of the previous videos. Those who march good on parades are not ready to fight. That's a really, that's an old phrase. Parade ready or inspection ready units aren't combat effective. Some of the grungiest, orneriest, angriest dudes with uniforms that weren't necessarily spick and span have been some of the best service members I've ever served with. When you need a video to explain 8 reasons you are winning, you are not winning. This person is asserting that if we need to make videos on why we're winning, we are in fact not winning. It is wild how bad at war Russia is considering all the practice they have had. Invading another country is easily one of the most difficult military maneuvers to pull off, for sure. And so I don't know that you can knock Russia too much because they are literally trying to do the hardest thing possible, something that many countries have failed at in history. But yeah, I mean, they haven't accomplished their goal in a very long time. That's objective and observable. Russia is very good at certain things. They're exceptional at artillery. They're very good at electronic warfare. They're very good at like propaganda, information ops, psyops, whatever you want to call it, but taking a whole nother country, especially a country that doesn't want to be taken, that still has active political and military leadership, it's very challenging. The Ukrainian people have something very real to fight for, and it is quite literally their home. I love all the random bits of history I'm picking up in these comments. I really do. And I appreciate you guys commenting about it because I learn something quite literally every time that I breeze through the comments. Sometimes I learn that I'm a terrible human being. Sometimes that's what I learn because there are people out there that tell me. Great video, man. I've been watching this war since the beginning and couldn't have gotten close to how concise you were with your recap. That genuinely means a lot. I really appreciate that, man. Thank you very much. Lost ships to a country that doesn't have a navy. That about sums it up. That will for sure be one of the funniest facts that comes out of this conflict. Thank you for the comments, guys. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you watch one of my other ones. I do geopolitics videos every week. I love this stuff. Please continue commenting because I learn something quite literally every time I post a video. I will see you guys next time.